Hello, everyone, and welcome to the KOPE Life Podcast interview series. Thank you so much for being here. Anyone who's going to join us live, anyone who's live, anyone who's watching the replay, I appreciate you. I'm so grateful for you joining us today. As always, I'm excited about every time I do this, but today I'm especially excited because of our guest today. We're going to jump right in, and let me introduce you to Jean Ibanez Payne. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well, very well. So, I like to just jump right in with the easy question. So, why don't you tell us about yourself? Who am I talking to?
So, I am actually I was born here in the US, and I'm actually from Colombia, South America. And I am the CEO of TI Verbatim Consulting. I'm also a Navy veteran and a proud mommy to an 11-year-old and wonderful husband and two four-leg animals.
All right. Man, one thing I love about the podcast is really just getting to know people. And so before we dig into your story, and we've talked before, we know we're going to dig into that, but what is it that what are maybe your specific values? What's important to you?
For me, I think are two things: feeling valued and feeling respected. I think for me, and as a CEO of our company, I think when people feel value and they feel respected, they will bring their best to work.
I love it. I love it. And really that applies to all aspects of life.
Mhm.
When it comes to raising your kids, to dealing with clients, everything in between, right? You matter to me and I respect you. I
Mhm.
love it. Thank you for that. So, you have and well, I would say you have a very inspiring story, what you've told me. And so what I want to know really is what is your story? And you can what I want you to do is I want you to be authentic and real. Like you say what you want to say, you be yourself and just let us have it.
That's a that's a really loaded question, Charleston. And first, I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I had never been on any kind of platform to be able to talk about this, and I think the first time that I actually talked about it was not long ago in the LinkedIn post where I kind of briefly described kind of my story, I guess, without really going into any detail, particularly because often people will say, well, I want you to be vulnerable. I want you to be authentic. But do they really want to hear what you want to talk about? Right. And so thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today. So let me just kind of start from the very beginning and get to my story because I wanted to give a little bit of context and if anything else of anybody that is up there who has faced kind of any kind of trauma. I'm hoping that my words today will encourage people to speak up and to be authentic and to be vulnerable and to really know that it is okay to talk about it. So I was actually born in Colombia. No, I was actually born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And often people will say, "How can somebody be born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and have a funny accent?" So I actually went to Colombia with my father when I was 3 years old. My dad and my family came to the U.S. to basically work blue collar jobs, construction, and many other jobs. my dad and to earn enough money for us to go back to Colombia. And when I was 15 years old, my father basically said to me and my older brother that we needed to come to the US because the political instability that we were facing in Colombia. So anybody who's from Colombia will know the guerrillas, how horrible that is and was for many people. And my family was one of those impacted by that. And so my father sent me and my brother to the US to live with family members who have never met, really haven't really met, maybe seen them here and there a couple of times. And then I went to live in California, and I lived and from there, I always tell people I was sent in a Greyhound bus from LA at 15 years old to Valdosta, Georgia. And I went to 3 different high schools, and I was learning English. When I was 18 years old and graduating from high school, I was basically kind of asked by my relatives, so what are you going to do? What's the plan? I mean, I have no plan whatsoever. And I went to the Navy recruiting station and joined the Navy. And I spent several extra weeks in boot camp because I didn't speak English well, so I was held back to perfect my English a little bit more. And I'm still learning English today, Charleston. So don't use any slangs with me because I tend to visualize everything. So if you tell me it's raining cats and dogs, I'm going to be like, what do you mean it's raining cats and dogs? So I'm not really good with slangs. So anyways, I joined the military and went through boot camp. And my first station was Naval Puget Sound in Seattle, Washington. And one of my first experiences that I had with trauma is it was one day, it was 4:00 in the afternoon. I was in the office with another seaman petty officer senior than me. And then my commander and my ensign were in the back door. And this guy decided to expose himself. And I was, I was barely 19 years old. And after that happened, I decided to tell my superiors the next couple of days. And keep in mind, this is the day this happened was the same day that everybody had gone to sexual harassment training, which sometimes I think is what a joke in the military. And I told my superior, and she went on and told my chief petty officer, and then it was horrible. It was horrible because I was treated as the offender. I lost all my friends that I so-called friends that I had in the military in my office. Nobody wanted to talk to me. Everybody saw me as a troublemaker. How dare you turn them in? And this guy ended up writing a letter to me, which was a joke. And he did admit to unzipping his pants, but then he got kind of like slapped in the hand, and he went on with his career. And that was just the beginning of many experiences that I had. And I think one of the things that really, I think, bothered me the most is that I called my parents crying, telling them what has happened. And one of the things that I was asked, Raya, off the bat about my family, especially my father, is what did you do to deserve that? Um, what is it that you did to cause that? So it was very hard because I felt that the people that were supposed to protect me the most turned against me, and so that was the beginning of. There was several times where I was basically. Um, um, People got me drunk, and I remember specifically one time where I woke up in the hospital. I did not know how I got there, and and I woke up and I had bruises all over my. I woke up in the hospital and I had bruises all over my arms, um, and I did not know how I got there, and none of my friends were there. And there was many instances where I was coerced into having sexual relations with senior petty officers who would basically make me feel guilty, uh, not um, basically giving in to what they were asking me to do, and that happened many times.
Well, a couple of things I'm thinking. First of all, um, so when you had your first incident of this individual exposing himself to you, and you reported it, was there a time where you just felt like, where you regretted reporting it, where you felt like the victim?
Oh my gosh, yes, yes. I regretted it the moment I said anything because people looked at me as a troublemaker. How dare you talk about it? How dare you? How dare you bring this up?
I want
Um,
I want to make a couple points, really, just for the audience, anyone who's going to watch this. I want them to understand how the military has changed, because the story that you're telling, it's sad that it's so relatable to a lot of young women. I've spoken to many young women where this happened to them, 18, 19 years old, and you said you were barely 19. And and what I want people to understand now is that, based on the recent changes in the National Defense Authorization Act, those forms, like, that is sexual harassment, that is a violation of the UCMJ. You can now get prosecuted for that. And also, when people ostracize you like they did to you, the way they treated you, that is now also a punishable offense, not for the UCMJ, but that is considered something that is illegal in the military, retaliation. And so they're putting systems in place to deal with that, because what happened, just like you said, people go through this and then they feel worse, what we call re-victimization. Right, you were victimized by the incident, and then there's the betrayal, the ostracization. I'm gonna go practice that word later. um, and so the system's better now. However, the emotions that you felt are still being felt by victims today. So so you mentioned, and so you were just speaking on what happened with the chief petty officers, making them senior enlisted people, making you feel guilty about not doing what they wanted, those kinds of things. So I just want to step back and let you continue on with your story.
yes, and it was not just the petty officers or it was officers too. It was across the many levels, right? And and then I have to give credit to some of the changes that have been made, Charleston. But the reality is that as I'm still talking to some of the women coming out of the military 2 years ago, there's women who were sexually assaulted. Um, and again, yeah, there's trainings and things that are being done, but the reality is that a lot of the times this behavior hasn't changed. Um, so so this this happened, really, I was in the military for 4 years active, 4 inactive. And this type of things happened throughout my 4 years. Um, and and I lived with I would say the consequences, right, of everything, the trauma that I went through, and suppressing all these emotions. And I never talked to anybody. Throughout the past, since 1996, when I got out, um, I was constantly with nightmares, um, teeth grinding, um, no trust, specifically, a hard time being around males in military uniform, um, and just a lot of flashbacks of everything that happened. And it wasn't until 2016 or so that I decided to talk to my husband and tell them, because he didn't know either. I did not share with anybody. And I finally, around 2016, when I filed for disability with the military. So this is one thing too I want to emphasize to Charleston today is, for anybody that's hearing me and they have been out of the military for 10, 15 years, it's never ever too late to go back and do your paperwork for disability. Um, and I remember it was December of 2017, that I got a letter from the VA, and the letter said that I had been. So I went through the process, and of course, I went to get some, examinations with the VA, and I remember getting that letter, and the letter said that my disability had been accepted, and and I remember getting that letter, and my husband looked at me. He goes, It's not about the letter. It's not about the benefits. It's not about compensation. This letter here means that you have been heard as a victim, that you have been heard as a person, that not you can't have you're probably not going to have closure ever on this, but it's a way to feel heard. And that was kind of the beginning of me acknowledging and being okay with talking to him about the story and being able to share. And that there starts some of the therapy healing from that trauma, just the fact that I was heard.
I love that because really everybody wants that. Everyone wants to be seen and heard. And one thing that we've talked about a lot in the sexual assault circles, including the Me Too movement and all of that, was the idea of believing the victim. And so when you get that response that says, we accept your application, it's like they believe me. Because trying to convince someone that you've been victimized is very difficult. Whether you're having a conversation or writing a letter, filling out a form, it doesn't matter. It's very difficult. What I want to ask you is a couple questions. First of all, I want to know about how did you feel about yourself, the quality of person that you are, from the time that you joined the Navy to the time you got out of the Navy?
I think I was probably at the lowest self-esteem point in my life, which it didn't really stop until after I got out because I was suppressing those emotions. And I remember one of the incidents where I was talking to playing this game, this coin game. And then every time, I don't know if you know the game that where you, I guess I don't know, you do something, you end up having to take shots of alcohol. And I remember when I woke up in the hospital with all those bruises, everything, and bruises in my legs and my arms. There was no help emotionally after the first incident. There was no help emotionally after any of the other incidents. But instead, I was told that I needed to go to CAC training. And CAC is the substance abuse. I think it was like CAC, counseling is a substance abuse department within the Navy. And so really it felt horrible. A very low point, very low self-esteem.
Yeah, well, the thing about experiencing trauma, when you experience trauma, we know that the trauma is stored in the body, right? We know there's the mind-body connection. And after you experience trauma, there needs to be a place where you can return to normal functioning, where you feel safe and secure in your body. And that social support is what makes that happen. Those people being there to support you, those people being there saying, it's not your fault, and I still care about you. I love you for who you are. And so it's not just the event itself, but it's the aftermath where, oh, we understand that these bad things happen to you, but, and then they get into blaming you for what happened. So those are the kind of things that really lead people to go from trauma to PTSD, because PTSD isn't automatic. But when you're sitting and I can't imagine, I have not experienced what you're talking about, to wake up in the hospital and to be blamed for being in the hospital. So I understand it's very painful. So then from the time that you got out of the Navy, and you said that you actually reported and stepped up and said something 20 years later. So how were you able to really just move through life while suppressing that and keeping that a secret?
Oh, I think you just kind of pack it down there, right? Just pack it and don't deal with it. Don't talk about it. And Yeah, I just suppressed it. I suppressed it. That was just one of the ways how I dealt with it. And what's really impactful, and I think many people also deal with this, is how sexual trauma affects the relationships, right? Not just your immediate circle, but just the relationships that you have with people. There's no trust, even people with the best intentions. There's no trust, and there had been many side effects, health side effects, Charleston, with even my health, and again, I'm being fully transparent and vulnerable today, because I want my story hopefully to motivate somebody to speak up and to get help. But part of my evolution so it really, to answer your question, it truly affected the relationships. It took me, I think, probably maybe 7 or 10 years to like fully trust my husband, because I was thinking like, why is he so nice to me? Why, he's just going to come and use me. He's going to be gone. And there was so much anger that I had with just just for relationships in general, right? And yeah, so very, very difficult. And I'm still working on it. That's not something that goes away.
Right. So when you're dealing with trust issues in relationships, and and not just intimate relationships, but even friendships, really anybody that you meet, um how did that impact, just that time period, how did that impact how you felt about yourself after years of having the same kind of affect towards other people?
Um, it tremendously affects your self esteem. You feel like you're never good enough for anybody, and that you assume the worst on anybody, and your circle of friends or people is very limited because you have no trust. And because you have no trust a lot of the times, right? You don't have a lot of friends. And then because you don't have a lot of friends, life sometimes becomes very lonely, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, because really when we're talking about loneliness, it's not just the number of people around you, but it's the quality of the relationships. There are people that have a circle of 30 and 40 people that are extremely lonely because they can't get that connection. And so when you're talking about having low self-esteem and the inability to trust other people, you've created this barrier. And quite often we create this barrier that we don't feel we are worthy of breaking down. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because I feel like it's so much more than just here's the trauma, here's the symptoms. You're talking about your relationships, you're talking about living your life. And what you make me think of when you talk about suppressing these emotions is, how are you able to celebrate or enjoy the good times in your life? Like, did that affect your proud moments as well?
So, so one of the side effects, I'm sure you know this from your research and from your studies, is um, from PTSD. Sometimes from so much trauma or trauma that has happened in your life, you you can develop something that is called fibromyalgia, which I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with
Yes.
that. So that has been kind of the when so there was the military sexual trauma, and then I developed also fibromyalgia. Um, and I tell you, I have an amazing team in my company. Um, and I know another person who is the who also has PTSD from military sexual trauma. She also has fibromyalgia. Um, so to answer your question, I think from the time I felt like I was heard, that was a good motivation for me to start having some kind of like some closure to what I went through. But then it's very difficult um, with fibromyalgia to enjoy that closure, because that to me is a reminder of everything that I went through, being in pain 24/7, and just having to just really go through all those symptoms and all those pain conditions is always a reminder of what happened, right? So I will say I have almost like a mixed response when it comes to
When it comes
how
to
I dealing with that.
okay. Okay, yeah, that's when you bring up fibromyalgia, and I can tell you that for a lot of people that I've spoken to, doing what I'm doing now, and even when I was a sexual assault victim advocate when I was on active duty, we didn't talk about those things very often. There's so much focus on the event itself, whereas talking about the fibromyalgia, talking about the mind body connection, the way it impacts relationships, are conversations we need to have more often. And that's why I'm grateful for you just being here today to talk about those things. It's more than just a one-time event. So when people say, why don't you get over it, or you should be over it by now, the truth is it's still impacting you now. It's still there, right? Like I can't get over something when it's not over. And so I appreciate you sharing that. The mind body connection is so, it's so amazing to me. And for you to share that, I hope that it really really gets other people to realize that a lot of the things that they go through, the pain that they're enduring, it's not their faults. You're not weak. You don't have issues. It's not your fault. That is how you survived. That was your body's physiological response to trauma. Right? You didn't have a menu of options. You're like, "Oh, let me choose this." It's my body did the best it could to survive. And so, speaking of surviving, so you went through that, and I can't even imagine, because the truth is, if you actually gave us real details about every event, this might be a 3-day conference. so, so what's really going on is you told us about the MST, and then the years since, right, from the time you got out to the time you got the acceptance letter from the VA, and you struggle just even opening up to your husband, building trust and relationships. But then you got some sort of closure in December 2017. And so what I'm curious about is, how did you go from all of that to where you are now, running a company and helping other people? I want the good stuff.
Oh my gosh. I don't, yeah. So I tell you, sometimes I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's just from my family, my father, my mom, being so strong. I think about my mom, who, she was in Colombia with my father, and she was also sexually assaulted by the guerrillas in Colombia. And I mean, there's so much to unpack, and I think a lot of the who I am just comes from so much resilience uh, that I have learned. The same thing with my parents, and yeah. So I left the military in 1996, and I spent almost 15 years in the utility industry. Had a just great career, and then in 2010, my husband and I, adopted a beautiful little boy, uh, Gabriel, and I think in 2014. I came home, and I told my husband I was commuting 75 miles each way. And I told my husband that, this is not how I want to live life. And I want to do something else. In the last evaluation that I had in the corporate environment, I think this was like the catalyst. I was told that you communicate too much, you're too driven to get, to get things done. You're too direct. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I could really turn this into some great assets, as a business owner. And I decided. I came home and I told my husband, I'm like, I'm done. And he's like, don't do anything irrational. Just press on. It's going to change. And then I came home a couple of weeks later, and I quit. And I told myself, I want to create a work environment where people feel valued, they feel respected. But at the same time, I want to create an environment too where I can make a difference. right? Where I can feel that I can empower people to have psychological safety to talk to me, and so I created TIVC back in 2014, and our mission is to help people work better together. And what this company is doing, we come in and we assess workplace cultures. We do training and development. We do DEI services. But also what I want to do is to create a platform where I can be a voice to some of those people who have faced sexual assault, sexual trauma, and they have not been able to speak. And I want to use this platform to make a difference and to maybe have that one person that said, you know what, Jean gave me the courage to speak up. And that's kind of what I want to do.
I absolutely love it because it's really the marrying of a couple different concepts, right? So there's the work culture concept, and a lot of the things that we see involving work culture, workplace culture, and so on, they're generic, right? We need people to cooperate better, communicate better, and so on. A lot of that doesn't take into account individual trauma, individual struggle. And you're able to bring that lens, you're able to look through that lens. And so when you say psychological safety, you're not talking about someone just who is, they're mad at their boss because of an evaluation. We're talking about someone that experiences trauma and they're in a workplace where they feel supported. When you experience any kind of trauma, loss, anything that really diminishes your self-worth, you feel alone in the workplace. And so what you're doing, and I love it so much, is you're fighting back against that for the individual and the culture. I love that. I love that. So when I think about that, I think about, of course we're talking about psychological safety and sexual assault, but you also mentioned DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion. Have you, or do you have much experience dealing with people that feel traumatized in a kind of I can't even think of a way to say that, like trauma and discrimination together, right? If that makes sense. So can we talk about that for a minute?
So one of the things that our company does is we try to offer kind of services that follow this cycle, right? Because it's really easy to come into a workplace and tell you the services that you need without having the information, the data to back it up. So what we do is we will come into organizations who maybe, they call us because the ethics and compliance complaints have gone up. There's EEO complaints. There's a lot of attrition. So we will come in and we will do qualitative and quantitative analysis where we focus basically on the 4 Ps: the policies, processes, procedures, practices, to really also analyze the the feelings, the core values, the many different things that shape an organization. And so from there, we really take a look at the qualitative, quantitative, plus doing the focus groups, one-on-one interviews, and all that stuff. And then from there, we kind of come up what we call, I'm sure you have heard of this, the 360 assessments. Yes. The profiles so we do a profile for an organization. And from there, we do a strategic plan. And so the strategic plan, that's what will have exactly what we feel the organization needs. Either that might be, diversity training, inclusion training. So for example, we're working with some organizations now that they have asked us to come in and do psychology of bias training. resilience training, how to equip the leaders with some good coaching skills. So our work, yes, we see a lot of everything, a lot of everything.
I love that. I love that so much because, well, the four P's, what I think about were the two that you mentioned, or really three, right? I'm thinking about procedures and practices. That's really what I'm thinking about. Because rewriting the policy is easy. And then you take these procedures. For a lot of people, implementing procedures means printing it out and putting it all in all the SOP binders, making sure people knows what it says, and then having something in place where if you violate this, we'll do this. Okay, so now we call it implemented. But that doesn't mean it's being practiced. And so I love that you said that you said we're looking at procedures and practices. And so have you had, or I'll say, how do you deal with pushback when someone says our organization is inclusive, or you're wrong, we're actually doing it like this? You don't know what you're talking about. How does that go?
Well, it happens all the time.
Can
And
imagine.
so going back to the policies and processes, one of the things that we look at is that you also have to look at, okay, well, policies and processes. Let's look at the EEO complaints, right? Let's look at the attrition. How does that align? Is there potentially one specific, ethnicity that has more than the other, right? And also, when were the policies updated? 15 years ago. And do the practices really align to that SOP book? Again, there's a lot of things to be considered. By going back to your question of the pushback, I started the company to help people work better together. I started the company to give a voice, to create a place where people feel valued and respected. Everybody that knows me, I did not start the company to be a millionaire. I didn't start the company. I'm not striving to be the next Booz Allen or whatever. That doesn't interest me. We stand by your product, we stand by your practices, and we stand for doing the right thing. So a lot of the times, you have maybe consultants that go into organizations, and what they're looking for is what's the next project that I am going to get from this organization. So if I do this, what is this going to do to my future as a business owner? And for us, we are an unbiased, we're an unbiased business that comes in to do the work, and they will provide the best value while they protected the confidentiality of the employees who participated. That is our commitment to anything that we do. And sometimes, you know what? Sometimes you have to pay. We as an organization, as a company, have to pay a price for that because we're not telling people what they want to hear. And sometimes the people who end up hiring you are the people who the employees will say, you know what, they're a bad leader and this and this and this is happening. So it's a very tricky situation, but we stand by your product and by your mission.
I love that. I love that. Just being able to deal with people. And so when you talk about also teaching resilience and coaching skills, and obviously communication is a part of it. Some people just don't know how to talk to people in general. So
Mhm.
I love that aspect of it. A lot of times, though, when we talk about work culture and we talk about DEI, we're focused on race or gender, right? And lately, of course, in the last few years, there's been more talk about the LGBTQ community. But what I wonder is, do you see? There's three things that I think about that we don't talk about often enough: people with disabilities, people who are overweight, and age differences, ageism. So, I guess, how do you deal with that, or how often do you see those particular issues?
Often, often, uh, you know, I have had seen some examples of that people, employees, are so afraid to have a picture frame of them and their partner. because they're afraid of how they're going to be perceived by the company, right? Um, you see so many different things that you have to like scratch your head and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe some of this stuff is happening, you know? Um, I would tell you one of my first evaluations that I had working for corporate, I was told, once you speak English, you're going to be the perfect employee. Okay. Some people sometimes don't think about some of the microaggressions that happen in the workplace. They think that they're complimenting you, but in a way, they're reminding that person that they are different. Okay. And the same thing goes with that. When you talk about the being overweight or LGBT. I think there comes that inclusion aspect, but most important, I think you can achieve diversity, but if you don't have an environment where people feel valued and respected, then the inclusion piece will go out the window. But even more important, I would say, is that when we talk about equality, when we talk about equity, those are two complete different things. And then, somebody recently gave me an example about, the equity piece, and I thought it was such a great example. Let's just take, for example, somebody with special needs, right? There's an opportunity that is open, but you have to go to a building, and you have to go to the second floor to apply. Okay, but if this person who's special needs, who's in a wheelchair, doesn't know where the elevator is and can't get to the second floor, that person has not given that equity, that equal access to get to apply for that position. So that is also I think one of the biggest things that we as practitioners really have to think about is we got to think beyond just the diversity and the inclusion, but also that equity piece that is so important for equal access.
That is so true, and that actually reminds me of a job that I had. So I started this job, and the first or second day of my job, I was walking around to meet other people. There's different people I would have to collaborate on different projects. And these buildings used to be, they were old army barracks with large concrete stairs. And so I told the person I was walking around with that I have hip issues. And she was like, "Oh, it's okay. It's not that much." So we went up and down to the third floor a couple of times. And then we're working our way over to lunch. We're going to the cafeteria for lunch. And she's like, "Why are you walking like that?" And I told her, "I have hip issues. I'm limping now. Like walking is now more difficult for me than it was at 8 o'clock this morning." And her response was, "No, now I'll say this. She's an amazing, absolutely amazing person. She just didn't know because we didn't have that conversation, right? So there's no fault of hers. But I said in the beginning, I have issues with stairs. Whereas you're talking about someone in a wheelchair, there are no stairs. It's and these buildings didn't have stairs. The old army barracks don't have elevators. So yeah, that's exactly an example of exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I have some Air Force units that maybe could use your help.
Give them my
Um,
number.
yeah, it's and it's wild to me when we think about it because you and I had a conversation before where we talked about policy, and when it comes to equity and inclusion, diversity, there's this goal to meet the minimum standards. So, what do you say to people who say we're meeting the standards, at least we're doing this? Like they're telling you they're doing enough.
Hmm. I think that's one of the reasons why there is affirmative action plans now. I mean, there have been companies that have more than 50 employees have to comply with. And I was always fascinated when people would say, I'm making good faith efforts to achieve that. Um, I will say too, If you are operating on compliance versus commitment, then you're not serious about it. I would also said that anytime that you have to give anybody the business case of why diversity, equity, and inclusion are important, they're not serious about it. So I would, for anybody who does diversity, equity, inclusion, you have to have the commitment in that compliance. That is the only way how we are going to make a difference and get ahead and change today's environment.
So how does it affect the individual employee when they feel excluded and then something changes and they feel included? How does that impact their mental health, their commitment to the job?
There's a sense of belonging. You know how today we talk a lot about the diversity, equity, inclusion, acceptance, belonging, because when we feel, I'm not even going to say people, when we feel that we belong and we feel accepted and you feel included, I am going to bring the best to work.
Yes.
The best to work means engagement. 87% of organizations, 87% of the employees today are not engaged. That means they're looking for work somewhere else. Engaged employees equals acceptance and productivity. So when somebody feels included, they're going to give their best.
I love it. That's absolutely right. And the truth is, everyone who's ever felt excluded knows exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it's we've all lived it. We've all felt both excluded and included at different points in time. And so, what I'm wondering, I got a couple last questions for you here. What I'm wondering is what would you say to someone who really experienced, MST or PTSD in the military, and they're transitioning to the corporate world, but they're afraid about, I mean, they're just afraid of the transition. They're afraid of not fitting in because of their military experience. What do you say to that person?
I think the most important is get help. Get help to be heard, because that is the only way you're going to start that chapter, the beginning of whenever that closure aspect will come. For some people, it might never come because it's something that shaped your life, something that impacted you as a person. But it's important to have a level of support to get help so you can be heard. I would say that's the beginning of anything.
I love it. I love that so much. Like, I really do, because your answer had nothing to do about a career. It was about the person. You have to take care of yourself. With your LinkedIn profile, your job applications, your resume have no value if you really are just struggling with being yourself, struggling with accepting yourself, right? So it's hard to be accepted or feel included when I can't accept myself for who I am. So your response is just get help. And I absolutely love that. I really appreciate that answer. Um, and so, with that said, what is one final message you'd like to leave with all of our listeners?
I just want to say that, well, first, I want to thank you so much for having me today here, but also to anybody who listens to this podcast, I want to say that it's okay to be authentic. It's
Yes.
okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to tell your story. It's okay to get help. It's okay to say you have PTSD. It's okay to say you're military sexual, sexual MST survivor. It's okay. And I think the minute that we as survivors focus on that and less on what will people think, the better it will be for you as a survivor.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's okay to be yourself, tell your story, and just be authentically you. And really, that's part of the self acceptance that we all need. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I love the work that you're doing. I really feel like you're the kind of person that people can connect to you, the person, not just the company. And that's what's so important is that real connection. So I appreciate you so much. And on that note, I'm going to end this broadcast and just say thank you again so much. And to
Thank you.
everyone that's watching the replay, anyone that tuned in, thank you very much. I appreciate you. And until next time, guys, just have a great day. I appreciate you.